it's time to start. So let's get started. I will say a few words in Japanese. Okay. First of all, thank you very much, Miss Professor Jane Davidson, for giving us a very great opportunity, great lectures. Thank you very much. And I will just briefly introduce you to the Japanese audience in Japanese language. Okay. Thank you very much. では、日本語で始めたいと思います。
I would like to switch to Japanese. I am Keiichiro Kobayashi from Keio University and Canon Global Strategy Research Institute. We have Dr. Jane Davidson. She will be giving a lecture today. And Dr. Davidson is a person who was instrumental in the legislation of Well-being of Future Generation Act 2015 in Wales. I understand that she spent her younger years in Africa and came back to Wales, and she was a teacher before becoming a city assembly member at Cardiff. And she became a minister for education and sustainable development and environment of Wales. And she legislated the Well-being of Future Generation Act. Based on her experience, we hope to learn many lessons today. After the lecture, we will hear from Anadate-san and Takahashi-san of Yahaba Town, Iwate Prefecture, about their idea of ordinance. They are drafting a new ordinance, and they will be sharing their idea behind the ordinance. It is called Future Design Ordinance. Preparation is underway, and we would like to invite Jane-san's comment after Yahaba Town's presentation. In Japan, in government and in policy making, we are considering the future design concept, and we have much to learn from Well-being of Future Generation Act Wales, and I very much look forward to today's lecture about the mechanism that is in place in Wales. First, I would like to ask Professor Tatsuyoshi Saijo to give a commentary for 10 or 15 minutes. Professor Saijo, please. I am Saijo. I'm not a legal expert, but for the audience today, I would like to provide as much information as possible on this Well-being of Future Generation Act. I hope that will lay a platform before you have lecture by Ms. Davidson. And I would also like to compare the Future Generation Act and Future Design Ordinance. I am Saijo, and Davidson-san legislated or created this act. Wales is a country or region or a local area, and this is a fundamental law for Wales. You might wonder where Wales is located, and it is, I'm going to show you where. I will select laser pointer. It is here. I think Cardiff is around here. I hope I'm right. I will provide you with a background, and this is something I have taken from Jane-san's book. This region led industrial revolution, and for the first time in history, it shifted from agriculture to industry. In the middle of the 19th century, this was the end of Edo era in Japan. Two-thirds of the residents were engaged in economic activities other than agriculture. This was truly the place that led industrialization. However, in the beginning of the 1990s, amongst all families, about 1/3 were in poverty in Wales. To eliminate inequality and to enhance health of the people and well-being of the future generation, it was thought that Wales should lead. That was Jane-san's idea. And during 1997 to 1998, under the Labour administration of Prime Minister Tony Blair, there was devolution. In Japan, there was also a decentralization, but it did not go as far as in the UK. And in 1998, the duty to promote sustainable development was written in or enshrined in the Welsh Government Act, which was the first in the world. And as for Well-being of Future Generation Act, there are 4 well-beings, the 7 goals and principle. The 5 points, I will cover these quickly and would also like to compare future design and Well-being Act. Social, economic, environmental, and cultural are 4 pillars of the Act. These are interrelated. Another point is that there are 7 goals. And in the middle is Wales. And around Wales, there are 7 goals. And what are these 7 goals? I will just go over them very quickly. Prosperous Wales, resilient Wales, healthier Wales, a more equal Wales. So far, maybe it might be a common sense, but in prosperous Wales, recognize the limits of global environment is also mentioned. 5, 6, 7, these are unique. Wales of cohesive communities. The importance of community is included in the goal, and Wales of vibrant culture and thriving Welsh language. Welsh language, not English, you might wonder. Actually, in Wales, there is a Welsh language which reflects the heritage and culture of Wales, and it is different from English. And last point is a globally responsible Wales. Very, very admirable goal. Kinki region is where Kyoto is located. And I don't think anyone has ever heard of Kinki region that will be globally responsible, but Wales advocates to be globally responsible. As for the principles, sustainable development, meeting the needs of a future generation, meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet those needs. Present generation, future generation, there should be a win-win. There are also 5 points that must be taken into consideration, not just short-term, but long-term. And the government divisions should not have silos. They should be integrated. There should be engagement, involvement, and public organizations should collaborate. And there should also be prevention to prevent problems in the future. These are the 5 points that are considered. Public organizations, these are related to public organizations. Under the law, the duty is imposed on the public organizations.
And here you see many indicators. National well-being indicators framework in total, they have a total, I think it's now currently over 50 indicators. So they try to measure using the variety of indicators. For example, this is how they measure using the indicator. There are many, so let me pick up one of these. Let's take a look at this. Levels of the nitrogen dioxide pollution in the air, that's NO2. So they would measure the level of the nitrogen dioxide pollution in the air. I am not so sure which bureau inside the Welsh government they would do this, but they would try to suppress the levels of the nitrogen dioxide. By the way, this fourth indicator is related to the first, second, third, and seventh goals that I've talked about. So they have created this matrix table, as you see here. One another important point to be noted is availability of 30 or so organizations that have been created, and there are people called commissioners. But you see, whom you see here is the very first commissioner. Sophie Hong-sang is the name of the first commissioner. Well, in relation to government policies, she had made an advice. Of course, there were no authority, but in a way, she had authority to make a complaint. For example, you see the town Newport. Well, somewhere around here, there is a town called Cardiff. Which is the capital. So in between the Cardiff and Newport, it is around 13 to 14 kilometers away. And in the north side of the Newport, there is this highway indicated in indicated in blue. And somewhere around here, there is a tunnel. Inside the tunnel, there are two ways, and in the highway, there are three ways, which is causing the traffic jam frequently. Therefore, there was a talk about establishing the bypass with the government funding. But Sophie-san mentioned that we should not spend the money here, but instead there are many other things with a higher priority. And she opposed to this idea by the government of establishing the bypass. And the Bureau of the Government in relation to the transportation made the following proposals. If that's the case, then Newport and Cardiff shall be connected with the new railway. And how about establishing the bus route from each station so that people would be able to access anywhere with the one ticket? That was this proposal that had been made. I am not so sure as how this turns out, by the way. Furthermore, after the term of the Sophie-san is over, now somebody by the name of Walker-san had been assigned as a second commissioner. Lastly, I would like to talk about the commonalities and difficulties with the future design. Jane-san, I would like to have Jane-san to know a bit about the idea of the future design in the sense that you can see a person in the present. And of course, people or he or she need to forecast what may happen in the future from the present, whether it's going to be alpha, beta, or gamma, which one is going to happen, and that these can be referred to as the future vision. So idea here is to work on the backcasting from forecasted future. And we refer to this as a present design. The reason being that we are doing this from at the basis of the present. We are standing now in the present and trying to forecast at the future and then trying to work on the backcasting. Though there are times when we think about the past from the present. For example, people in the past had tried to work on the forecast of what would happen in the future, which leads to the current present. Though when we think about the past from the present, we would be able to come out with better idea, such as D or E. Of course, there is no way that we will be able to make changes to the choices being made by the people from the past. But anyhow, this is what we call as a past design. Now, let's move. Let's think about things from the future. So let's assume that we are in the future. We, as a human, would be able to do so, which I think is not possible for other organisms. So we can use this method to think about the present from the standpoint of the future, epsilon or sigma. These better idea can be generated by doing so. This is what we mean by the idea of the future design. Based on our experience, this green portion can be quite can sometimes bring and generate a wonderful idea, especially the senior people would be able to think as to what may happen after they pass away, and would be able to come up with massive number of ideas that could be that could bring the better at the future. And the future design actually encompasses the three, or sometimes we only refer to the future design portion of the future design. So in that sense, definition is a bit inconsistent, but anyhow, this is what it is. So what's the commonality and the difference between the future design? Well-being act is thinking about the future from the present, which I think is the biggest difference that it has against the future design. And as for the well-being act, it is rather the top-down approach because it utilizes the act. And in case of the citizens' assembly, it is rather the bottom-up approach. And I would say that the future design would think about the present from the future. That's the biggest difference. And not only that, it can also utilizes both top-down and bottom-up approach. For example, amongst your family or amongst the G7 leaders, this future design can be adopted. So in that sense, perhaps the future design can be referred to as something practical. It can be used for the small the places, but it can use in the middle size or the large in a large scale as well. Lastly, I would like to talk a bit about the principle. In case of the Wells Act, it is based on sustainable development, thinking and living differently. Well, as a basis for that, there is this concept of the futurability, which is as follows. Well, a person exhibits future ability when he or she experiences an increase in happiness because of deciding to forego current benefits and acting towards enriching future generations. That's the type of the personal attributes that can be activated with this. But what if everyone, including the current generation, the past generation, and the future generations would be able to work together? Then I guess the target would be the survivability of the mankind. Well, and so now we would like it's time for the Dr. Davidson to give us a talk. Now that I'm done with my talk.
Well, thank you very much indeed, arigato, and I'm delighted to be joining you here, evening in Japan and early morning in Wales. And that was a really interesting presentation. Perhaps just to say a little bit about me to start off. As has been said by Professor Kobayashi, I started my life as a teacher. I was brought up in Africa, and that has been very important in my life. My father went over to Harare in Zimbabwe to start one of the first multiracial medical school in Africa, and therefore I was brought up in this incredible place of nature. Our whole lives were completely nature rich in the 1970s, and I think that's a very important point for those of us who are old enough to remember just how full nature has been in our lives. Not always pleasant, lots and lots of insects, lots of snakes, but all those elements were part of the rich tapestry of life. And of course, we are part of that as well. So when I came to live in the UK in my teens, I came with this rich love of nature and also a passion for education, a passion for equality, and those things have never left me in my life. And as Professor Kobayashi said, I was privileged to become one of the first new National Assembly members in Wales when devolution was given to Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland, the smaller countries of the United Kingdom. So I found myself in 1999 in a position whereby I was one of the first of 60 new members of what is technically a regional government in United Nations terms, because Wales is not a member state of the United Nations, but it does have substantial, what we call primary powers. It does have substantial lawmaking powers. So what I'd like to do in this session now is, with reference back to what we've just heard from Professor Saijo, to look a little bit more in detail at why Wales has been the first country in the world to have a law like this, and then to look a little bit at what that law is doing in terms of changing our practices away from the kind of traditional growth agenda of governments, which can often lead to what we call a take, make, waste agenda, where you extract very extractive industries, you make something from those, and then you put everything else into landfill, which has a very negative impact on the world, and of course on people living close to that as well. And then I'm very much looking forward to hearing about future design in practice, because it feels to me as though the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and future design are a fantastic marriage of a really practical way of doing something that can appeal to people's imaginations, underpinned by a law. So I'm now going to share my screen with some slides. And I do hope that you can see these slides. So what you will see here, you will have seen this read from my book, both on this slide here, and you will have seen that on the previous slide from Professor Saijo. But yes, I was asked to write the story of why Wales did this. And of course, although I am part of the story in the sense that I'm the minister who proposed the legislation, or was the minister at the time, it is a story of many, many people, and it's a story that takes place over a long period of time. But I think that this is an important slide in this context, because although the story has taken place over a long period of time, I think the understanding of our impact on the world as developed nations is actually one of those wake-up points for me that happened in the early 2000s. And I think it probably was about 20 years ago that I first saw this slide. This is updated to 2023. I initially saw one around 2003. But the important element of it is that all those countries on the right of this single wonderful earth of ours, and I've highlighted both Japan and the United Kingdom, are using many more resources than the whole planet has available. Now, this is a notional metric. It actually looks at all of land and sea and effectively divides it by the population of the earth, and then divides that by the population of individual countries to see what each country is doing. So all the countries on the left-hand side of this picture of Earth are using far less resources, but still more than the Earth has available for us. And countries which are not even on the chart such as India, are actually countries which are using fewer resources per head of population than the Earth has in its resources. So all the countries on the right-hand side are the countries which are contributing most greatly in terms of the challenges we have in the context of both the climate crisis and the nature crisis. You've heard already that in 1999, we had devolution. I understand now that you had some decentralization in Japan, but it didn't go as far as devolution to Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland. And what that devolution did was give each of the small countries in the United Kingdom additional powers. And in many ways, this was to compensate for the fact that England has nearly 90% of the population of the United Kingdom, and Wales is something around 3%, Scotland about 5%, Northern Ireland about just under 2%, so that you had a kind of unequal democracy where when people often talk about the United Kingdom, we're only talking about England. The UK government is centred in England. It makes decisions that are primarily for England. And there was a recognition by Tony Blair when he first became Prime Minister that actually if we were going to ensure that the cultures and ambitions of the small countries around the UK could be protected, then actually there needed to be some decision-making powers that were created in those countries. And the really interesting thing about Wales, and probably the single reason that we have the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act now, is that the Government of Wales Act, the first Government of Wales Act that actually set up the new democracy in Wales, gave Wales, the new government in Wales, a duty to have a scheme setting out how it would promote sustainable development in the exercise of its functions. And the definition of sustainable development that was used at that time was the Brundtland definition, which is the UN definition. It underpinned the first Earth Summit. And I'm sure that many people on this call will be aware of it. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And of course, this translates very well into the concept of future design, as we've just seen in Professor Saijo's presentation. So Wales had not only a new democracy, but it was the only part of the UK that had this new duty. And that was down to members of the UK Parliament adding this in just before the Government of Wales Act became law. So people like me, who came in 1999 as one of the first members of this new democracy, and particularly because in my first year, before I became a minister, I was the deputy speaker of the new democracy. Now, as somebody who'd been a teacher and a policy worker and was passionate about nature and passionate about education and passionate about Wales, my adopted country, I loved the fact that we had this duty and that no other part of the UK had it. And now the incoming government, which I then joined in the year 2000, we determined to take this duty very seriously indeed. And we tried really hard during the next 10 years to make this duty work. But we found towards the end of that period of time, and I'm very happy to answer more of this in questions if people would like to take this forward. But we found towards the end of that decade that actually a duty to promote sustainable development in the exercise of our functions, I'm effectively carrying out now. I believe in it fundamentally. I want to promote it, but it doesn't have any more legal basis than that. So I can literally promote to you all today and I would have satisfied that duty and nothing would have changed as a result of it. And that's why, as the minister responsible, I realized that a duty to promote was not enough. We had to have a duty to deliver sustainable development in the exercise of our functions. And that's what then led to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And you've already seen a picture of this in the previous slides, but I just want to emphasize a few things on this slide that hopefully will make it more real for you. The 4 pillars on the bottom left-hand side, if you've worked in the field of sustainable development, you will know that the core pillars are generally around society, environment, and the economy, and how you balance the interrelationship between the 3. Normally what happens is the economy wins and the environment is damaged, and society is often damaged because everybody is focused on the economy. But these 4 pillars are about how they interact together. And the one that was added when the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act became law in 2015 was culture. And that is incredibly important. Your culture is so important to you. Our culture is so important to us. And of course, it's our culture and our heritage. And you know a bit now about, Wales's move as an primarily agricultural country to the Industrial Revolution, the first and fastest of the UK countries to do so. But the legacy we have from that, from the Industrial Revolution, was huge amounts of ill health, lots of people who were unemployed as the industry moved on, lots of communities in the wrong place to benefit from a new Wales that was moving towards more service industries. So the culture and heritage of our countries is incredibly important on this basis. And you see, as has already been described, you see the 7 goals, the names of the goals, and we'll, obviously we had them in Japanese in the first slide, but the names of the goals around the country of Wales. But round the outside of these goals are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And the reason that the law in Wales is considered very special in United Nations terms is that it's not only the first country to have a law to enshrine a duty to deliver for future generations, but it is also the first country in the world to have a law to deliver on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, which of course over 190 countries, members of the UN, have also signed up to. And then in the top left-hand side, you'll see the 5 ways of working. And both the goals that are delivering on the UN goals and these 5 ways of working are on the face of the legislation. That means they're written into the face of the Act. They're written into the Act itself rather than coming in regulation subsequently. And that's a very, very important point, because now the government and all the public services in Wales are required to deliver on these 7 goals linked to the Sustainable Development Goals, and are also required to deliver on these 5 ways of working. They have to think long term, they have to think preventatively, they have to collaborate with each other, they have to integrate outcomes, and they have to involve people about whom decisions are being made. And here are the definitions on the face of the Act of the goals. And what is interesting about them is the fact that you don't see the word growth in the description of a prosperous Wales. Yes, it must be innovative, it must be productive, it must be low carbon, it must recognise the limits of the global environment. That goes back to that ecological footprint slide I showed you earlier. It must use resources efficiently and effectively. So how do we get a more circular economy rather than a linear economy that makes waste? It must act on climate change. It must generate wealth. It must generate employment opportunities. But those must be created through decent work. So a very different definition of what prosperity will look like, or we hope will look like in Wales, than the tradition we must have growth at all costs, no matter what is left behind. So this is about how do we have responsible prosperity? How do we make sure in our nation of Wales, how do we make sure we have increased biodiversity and healthy functioning ecosystems? And how do we have the ecological resilience to adapt to change, for example, climate change? And what you'll see about all of these goals is the fact that if you look at the healthier Wales, a society in which people's physical and mental well-being is maximized, and which choices and behaviors that benefit for future health are understood, it's not using the normal measures that we use in the United Kingdom of how many doctors do we have, how many nurses do we have, how many hospital beds do we have, how quickly can you be seen by doctors or nurses. What we're looking at is how can we maximize people's physical and mental health. Similarly, in terms of equality, how can we maximize equality? How can we create a Wales of vibrant culture and thriving Welsh language? There's an aim for, there's 3 million people who live in Wales. We're a small country, 10 million sheep. But actually, can we have a third of people happily using Welsh as a language by 2030? And a Wales of cohesive communities, these words were chosen by the Welsh people over many discussions and consultations and engagements over the decade about, we all would like to live in attractive, in viable, in safe and well-connected communities. So just how, can we say that that's true of Wales at the moment? Absolutely not. But is this something which a government could deliver? Absolutely, yes. So what this is about is saying that we think that this will benefit people in Wales engaging with future generations legislation. And I'm delighted that when it was delivered, that it was supported across parties in Wales. And what may be of interest to you is the Globally Responsible Wales says that when Wales is doing anything to improve its own economic, social, environmental and cultural well-being, those pillars that underpin this legislation, it should also look at whether that makes a positive contribution to global well-being. And if we look at the converse of that, this does mean that Wales cannot offshore its emissions to another country, because then it would be being globally irresponsible. And obviously, if you have a whole new law like this, there has to be accountability mechanisms. And it was very important to me that when I proposed it, that the government itself had to deliver on it. So there had to be a body outside the government that could actually hold the government to account. And the main body is the Future Generations Commissioner. We've had two now, because the Future Generations Commissioner has one single term of 7 years. And that's deliberate because it crosses at least 2 political administrations. We currently have terms of 5 years. We used to have terms of 4 years. And from the 2026 May general election in Wales, we will return to having 4-year terms. So the commissioner operates across 2 political administrations and therefore is looking to share their expertise and experience with the people of Wales. Also, all public services in Wales, including the government, are audited by a person that we call the Auditor General for Wales. So because they're all audited by the Auditor General, it means that the Auditor General has had to change the way they audit. to incorporate this act. And of course, because it's a law, people can go to the courts as well. My apologies. One of the things I was asked recently on a visit to Scotland, because Scotland has recently consulted on having very similar legislation to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, is that what I felt were the key elements of the legislation. And I think that it might be useful to share those with you now. So the first one I've talked about, the idea that a duty to promote doesn't change anything. So I had to propose replacing it with a duty to deliver. The Act applies to every organisation accountable to Welsh Government. And that's critically important because it's also about Welsh Government ministers are accountable under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act as well. So the Act applies to every organisation, public service organisation in Wales accountable to the Welsh Government and including the Welsh Government. Using a UN definition of sustainable development has also been very important because the interest we have across the world now, about 18 different countries have just expressed interest in this legislation. And if we hadn't used the UN definition, we'd have a competitive definition. So the use of the UN definition is very important here, as is the 7 goals being linked to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I've talked already about culture being added to the traditional pillars of environment, society and economy, and the fact that the 7 goals and the 5 ways of working are on the face of the Act, and therefore everybody has to deliver on those. That the fact that the Act is audited through the usual public sector mechanisms, but that independent scrutiny and support is provided by an independent commissioner. And it was interesting that our first commissioner, Sophie Howe, who you see in this picture, when she did her independent review just before she finished in her term as commissioner, 7 years after the start of the legislation, what she found was that the embedding of the Future Generations Act in the DNA of Welsh public policy was world leading. The reach is huge. Everybody who finds out about it in Wales loves it, although it isn't yet a people's piece of legislation, but that its success has resulted more from leadership and commitment than embedded processes. So the second commissioner, Derek Walker, has determined that his term in office will focus on that sentence that is in the yellow box. It's rather than leadership and commitment, what are the embedded processes that need to be in place? And in the blue box below, clear leadership, continual communication, constant review are going to be needed for the government to move successfully to the next phase of implementation. So the second commissioner is focused on those 2 areas. But if we just look at some examples, because people always want to see, well, what difference has this made? And here are some examples. A universal basic income for people coming out of the care system. The most disadvantaged young people in Wales are those people who have no family, who've been brought up either in a care home or with foster carers. And at the age of 18, they have the poorest outcomes of any group of young people aged 18. So the Welsh Government has now introduced a universal basic income pilot and has paid them a minimum wage for 2 years for a pilot, which is ongoing at the moment, to see whether that can improve the outcomes of the most disadvantaged group in society. The way the Welsh Government is changing its approach to land is focused on sustainability. We've got very big issues in terms of the quality of our water. So a 5-year cleanup is there with source to sea river management. Tripling peatland restoration is there as well. And also, if we look at energy, a tidal lagoon challenge has just been announced with £250,000 UK pounds allocated to 3 projects to work up proper feasibility studies to come into government for funding applications by the end of this year. The fact that government has agreed to do the protecting 30% of land and sea by 2030. And you may, one of the most contentious ones is we now have a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit on all roads going through residential areas in Wales. And you've already heard about the decision that was taken in 2021 not to proceed with an additional 6-lane motorway because of the consequences on a triple SI, which is European designation for a very, very important nature area. And here I have the ban on smacking children. Back in 2003, when I was education minister, a number of us as ministers in the then Assembly government tried to promote a ban on smacking children, and it was unsuccessful. And yet, as soon as we had the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, it went through immediately. And the work that I'm doing at the moment is in relation to Net Zero Wales 2035, because Wales, if we're going to demonstrate that the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is useful, the area that is most pressing is, can we tackle the climate and nature crises in Wales? So I was asked to lead by 2 political parties in Wales to provide independent advice to examine potential pathways to net zero by 2035. And when I was asked to take this on, I only agreed to do it because this is 2/3 of the Parliament members in Wales. Wales now has a full Parliament. And because this was about how we could use the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act to ensure that our proposals would be fair and just and nature positive. So this is the way in which we have undertaken our work. So at the centre of our work is the Wales Net Zero group. I'll give you a link for the website for that group, but they are independent experts, all of whom are giving their time free, mostly from, well, half from Wales, a 1/3 from the rest of the UK, and others from other parts of the world. But we are doing this work according to those 5 ways of working. So we're working within planetary boundaries as required by the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. We're working within the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. We've determined our challenges based on the biggest emission reduction areas that will be needed in the context of their effect on climate, energy, food, connections, or transport, buildings. And then we offer a big hope and opportunity related to that goal about what does prosperity look like if you have education, skills, and decent work. All those factors around financing, around risk, around regulation, around circular economy are in the domains, and we are about to go out and test our initial ideas on organisations before we publish them to the Welsh Government. So our participation model, that notion about involving people about whom decisions are being made, is being done through partner organisations, with relevant stakeholders and the public through the work of our reference groups, which started at the beginning of January 2023. We are hoping that the Welsh Government will pay for a citizens' assembly to test our work after we've published, but we're also testing through the Wales Youth Parliament, which shadows the Welsh Parliament, to test our conclusions with young people in Wales. So the work that I've been doing as the invited chair of this group has been that we set up early in 2023. We collected evidence from across the world, open evidence through our website. We're synthesizing that evidence at the moment. By the end of this month, we will have decided which evidence that we know we've got and what gaps we have that we need to collect more evidence from. By the end of May, we'll be sharing our early conclusions, and we'll be presenting our report to commissioners at the Senedd in July 2024. But we'll be underpinning all of this work with an academic basis from Cardiff University, which is what we call Russell Group University, one of the most well-respected universities in the UK. And they have a centre for public policy, which has given us academic conclusions about the most fruitful lines of inquiry. And our group is therefore exploring those and will turn those fruitful lines of inquiry into pathways. And I come back to Africa at the end of my contribution today. I met Wangari Maathai in the Copenhagen COP in 2009. She was incredibly famous because she is seen as the person who shifted the balance in Africa in terms of tree planting, and there's now a great forest wall developing in Africa. But she has this wonderful quote about, in the course of history, there comes a time when humanity is called to shift to a new level of consciousness, to reach a higher moral ground, a time when we have to shed our fear and give hope to each other. And that time is now. And for me, it's about that international hope that we can share together. The more countries who talk to each other about different ways of doing things can lead to the notion that, as Nikhil Seth, when Wales first started its Future Generations Act in 2015, and Nikhil Seth came to the launch and said, what Wales is doing today, the world will do tomorrow. Well, it's taken quite a long time for that tomorrow to come. But now we see that in the United Nations, our common agenda, which is leading to its Summit for the Future in New York in September 2024, its proposal is to create a special envoy for future generations, which is based on the commissioner role in Wales. And I think partly it's based on that, because the commissioner in Wales cannot override the Welsh government, but he, in this case, can draw to the public attention where the Welsh government or any of the public services in Wales is not delivering on the principles of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. But he doesn't just blame, he also helps. He is a critical friend who helps the government or any public service to look at how they could better deliver this. And it is this idea of friendship and support that I leave you with here today. And my favorite quote from a man called John Rawls, who was an American philosopher: do unto future generations what you would have had past generations do unto you. Arigato.
Miss Jane Davidson, how do you do? It's very nice to meet you. And hello, everyone. I am Takami Hanadate, Manager of Planning and Finance Division of Yahaba Town in Iwate Prefecture. And this is my colleague from the same Planning and Finance Division. He's Mr. Masaaki Takahashi, who is mainly responsible for future design. I would like to talk about Yahaba Town Future Design Draft Ordinance that is under consideration. Can you see the screen? I'm having difficulty sharing the screen. Thank you for waiting. Let me first introduce our town, Yahaba Town, where we live. From the capital of Japan, Tokyo, Yahaba Town is located about 500 kilometers north, and the town is located next to Morioka City, the prefecture capital. Population is 28,076. We are the second smallest town in Iwate Prefecture with 67.32 square kilometers. It's a very small town, and we are surrounded by countryside landscape rich in nature. It is a compact city centering around Yahaba Station, where city infrastructure is more developed. The largest university in the prefecture, Iwate Medical University, relocated to our town from Morioka City, and we are seeing more urbanization. Yahaba Town became aware of future design about 10 years ago in 2014. There was a need to raise water tariff, and we had a workshop with our residents. This was broadcast on TV. And Professor Saijo, who is currently professor at Kyoto University of Advanced Science, was then professor at Kochi University Technology, and he watched the broadcast and thought it was indeed the same as the future design that he was researching, and he contacted us. That was the beginning. Assistant manager, Mr. Masaki Takahashi, already was working at the Planning and Finance Division, and therefore he is the most knowledgeable person about the history of future design efforts at Yahaba Town. We had discussions with researchers of future design, and we received the suggestion that we should use future design in developing the comprehensive plan for Yahaba Town, which is the most important plan for our town. In 2019, in developing the second phase of the 7th Yahaba Town Comprehensive Plan, with the help from Kochi University of Technology, we held future design workshop. The residents who participated in the workshop were asked to engage in discussion as the contemporaries, and in the second half, they participated as an imagined future resident. And although it was the first time everyone experienced imagining themselves as future resident, everyone was very animated and had a very vibrant discussion. Based on the opinions from the residents, the basic idea for the second phase of comprehensive plan was developed. I believe this was first ever such initiative in Japan. Yahaba Town Mayor, Mr. Takahashi, agreed with the results of the discussion and issued Future Design Town Declaration. And in around 2022, there began to be a discussion of introducing Future Design Ordinance, drawing reference from Well-being of Future Generations Act of Wales. In 2022, so it is a little close to 2 years ago. At the time, I was working at Taxation Division. I was not at all involved in the comprehensive plan nor the future design, but I was assigned a manager of Planning and Finance Division in April 2022, and I began to be involved. It has been close to 2 years since I met Professor Saijo for the first time. Members were trying to come up with the good concept and good naming for the ordinance that is connected to Yahaba Town. And I uttered some phrase in the moment of desperation, and that led me to me being the person responsible for drafting the ordinance. And come to think of it, I feel as if I was tricked into this position, but we are still in the process of drafting, and we are working on it with help from many people. I will come back to the ordinance itself later. But as for the 2015 Future Generation Act, being a Future Generation Act of Wales, we've already heard about this, and I'm sure the audience is also familiar with this. I understand that Ms. Jane Davidson was quite instrumental in legislating this act. I learned from the act, pursuit of sustainable development and well-being, creation of a vision for the future through national dialogue, setting of indicators for achieving well-being goals, approach towards administrative organs, duty to deliver, and the presence of future generation commissioner, which is important. The act has been a very useful reference as we draft our own ordinance. As for the administration mechanism, government mechanism of Yahaba town, as you see in this diagram, residents express their views to the parliament and the mayor and appeal to them. The mayor makes proposals. The parliament will check the proposals and approves them. The decision-making and policy promotion themselves are left to the executive organ, the mayor, and the town hall, which is an auxiliary organization supporting the mayor. The audit committee member checks whether the implementation and execution are appropriate. However, there is a problem with this approach. In order to be sustainable, we must think about the future generation, but there is a tendency to pursue the immediate benefit or the benefit for the current generation. What if we had our own version of well-being of the Future Generation Act? What kind of organization should we have? That is shown in this diagram. Based on the well-being of the Future Generation Act, should we have a commissioner that will audit from the future perspective? We believe that it is possible under our system to establish the position of commissioner who will express opinions to the mayor in the town hall that are decision makers and promoters of policies. But there will be a duplication of work between the audit committee member who audits the execution and commissioner who audits from the future perspective. It might be that two different people are doing exactly the same work. And it will also be very burdensome to audit whether future perspective is necessary for all administrative work. To select a commissioner, it has to be someone who has deep knowledge and experience of future design, and it's difficult to find such a person. To always demand future perspective comes with a very strong authority relative to policy promotion and decision-making by the mayor and may lead to confusion as to which is the executive organ. Because of these reasons, our current thinking is that establishing the position of commissioner may not fit well with Yahaba town. And against this backdrop, we are now considering Yahaba town future design ordinance. And please understand that what I'm showing you is only a work in process. Mr. Takahashi, assistant manager, I think has sent information in the chat box of the draft ordinance. I mentioned that I was assigned to Planning and Finance Division 2 years ago. And in the meeting with future design researchers that I attended for the first time, I was asked to comment as the manager. And since it was the first time that I attended the meeting, I did not much understand what was being discussed, but I answered in this way. I said that I believe well-being means contentedness or happiness. The pursuit of happiness sounds like happiness is something that we have to aspire to have very strongly. And I thought it would be nice if we can have small happiness continuously tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. And Yahaba town has an expression, Yambeni. And I said that a society where we can live in Yambeni way, that is the Yahaba version of well-being. In Japanese, there is an expression, just seasoning is just right. And Yambeni is the dialect in Yahaba. So it means, for example, in cooking, the seasoning is just right. So we can lead a daily living in good condition, just right. And we live with a sense of small happiness. It is not desperately pursuing happiness. And this word, yambeni, also may mean easygoing in both good and bad sense of the word. Future design experts liked this word very much. And because I used that word for some reason, I ended up being responsible for drafting the ordinance. So around us, we call the ordinance Yambeni Ordinance. But if we propose the ordinance under that name, Yambeni Yahaba town citizens may think that we are proposing nonsense. So for the moment, it is called Future Design Ordinance.
This future design ordinance currently has a subtitle of Co-creation ordinance to sustain happiness into the future. Co-creation is a phrase that Yahaba Town's mayor Takahashi loves, which means to create together. First, it stipulates the responsibility of consideration for future generations for the town and its citizens. Second, it requires consideration for future generations in town comprehensive plans. Third, it touches upon establishment of future design council. Fourth, it says that the ordinance shall be positioned as a basic ordinance for town development. The purpose of the ordinance is to clarify responsibilities of everyone so people's happiness is properly maintained across generations, and to practice town development where residents can continue to lead happy lives now and in the future. Let's look at the first of the 4 items. As for responsibility of consideration for future generation, under Article 4 of the ordinance, it is stipulated that town residents shall strive to consider the happiness of future generations of townspeople and must cooperate with town's measures to appropriately maintain the well-being of the future generations. Under Article 5, for town responsibility, it's stipulated that the town is responsible for formulating and implementing measures that satisfy both generations, as happiness of future generation is positioned beyond the accumulation of the daily lives of the present generation. In relation to the second item, requirement of the consideration for future generations in town comprehensive plans, Article 8 stipulates that consideration must be given to the appropriate maintenance of the well-being of the future generations. Furthermore, it stipulates that opinions of townspeople in the hypothetical future must be reflected based on future design. In relation to the third item, establishment of the Future Design Council, Article 20 explicitly states its establishment. Article 21 stipulates its jurisdiction as consultation, deliberation, and reporting on measures to maintain the happiness of future generations of townspeople, matters related to future design, and matters separately specified by the town mayor. Additionally, Article 22 stipulates organizations of the Council, including its members. Article 23 stipulates that expert committee members can be appointed in the Council. In relation to the fourth item, positioning as a basic ordinance for town development, as preamble, it is said that decisions that are mutually beneficial for both future and current generations are necessary. With that in mind, it is said that it is ideal for residents, businesses, and everyone in the town to work together to make the town where not only the present generation but the future generation can live sustainably and happily. Against that backdrop, administrative structure of Yahaba town, which I showed you in the beginning, will be changed this way if the ordinance is to be established. The residents will learn future design and conduct future design at Future Design Council and deliberate and report the measures, which enables reporting from the future perspective. This mechanism can ensure protection of interests of the future generations and sustainability, which enables us to counter popular will that deprives future generations of benefits. We all know future failures. I am not so sure if that is a correct word, but we all know the future failures, which are consequences of what the people from the past did. But still, so we tend to stay focused on to the benefit in front of us instead of for the future generation. As the philosophy of the SDGs in Welsh Future Generation Act show, we shall not deprive future generation of happiness as a result of our failures. Well, it is not written on the slide, but as you could see on a separate sheet of paper, which is Yahaba Town Future Design Ordinance Draft. Let me share the screen. This is it. I hope that you are able to see the ordinance which I am trying to share with you. My apology. Thank you very much for waiting. Well, I think you should be able to see the ordinance, and please refer to the article 2, which defines the future design. I believe now almost a commonly accepted definition of the future design is a method of decision-making that considers what the present generation should do from the perspective of the future generations to form a society that will last into the future. Additionally, we mention that reducing the benefits of the present generations or significantly changing the customary way of life may become necessary. Well, we did not use the word pain, but as everyone knows, some levels of behavioral changes are required. If environmental pollution continues, well-being of future generations cannot be possible. The behavioral change is required not only within the town, but throughout the world, and we have already started to act on it. Let me get back to my main slides. This is the last slide. I mentioned earlier that we have a locally used phrase, yambeni, which means being loose and suitable, but that is nothing improvidence about it. And the ordinance has three aims. First, to control the sustainability of the region through loose resident-led initiatives, literally control sustainability in Yambeni way. Secondly, to make consideration for future generations a commonplace in the future as number of residents with a future perspective gradually increase. So there will be more consideration paid in a Yambeni way for the future, and thought to have synergetic effects without interference with the Future Generations Act if that is ever to be enacted at the national level. The national government will not formulate the regulation with the spirit of Yambeni, rather the national ordinance will probably be approached differently or in a more strict manner. So there will be no interference. With that in mind, idea here is to utilize the future design ordinance to co-create town resilient against the future with residents. But we are still halfway through, so there will be portions to be changed. Initial draft of the ordinance was created by Masako Ichihara-san from the Research Institute for Humanity and Nature. And I applied changing its wording, which led to the current version. What people, including Professor Saijo, mentioned about including the word Yambeni somewhere in the main text, but as it is in the ordinance, we cannot just randomly use the dialect in the main text. So that requires future studying. How that will turn out, hopefully Jason's talk today would help us make it closer to the perfection. I would like to thank everyone for giving us this opportunity and thank you very much for your attention.